Claire Moore had always believed in building a life out of love. She worked hard, loved deeply, and forgave easily. When she married Daniel, she thought she'd found forever. He was calm and steady, the kind of man who balanced her bright energy. For years, they were happy dinners by candlelight, shared dreams, weekend road trips, and laughter that filled every corner of their little house in Portland. To everyone around them, they were the picture of a perfect marriage. But perfect pictures often hide the small cracks that no one notices until they spread too wide to fix. It started quietly, like most things do. Daniel began coming home later than usual, saying work had become demanding. Claire didn't question him. She trusted him completely. She made him coffee before bed, asked how his day went, and tried to ease his stress. He would smile, say everything was fine, and change the topic. But soon, fine turned into silence, and silence became distance. Claire felt it, the growing emptiness between them. The hugs became shorter, the laughter faded, and his eyes no longer searched for hers. She tried to fix it in all the ways she knew how: new recipes, surprise lunches at his office, even spontaneous weekend plans. But Daniel always had an excuse. Next week, he'd say. Or, I just need to focus right now. She nodded, pretending to understand. But every next week left her heart a little heavier dot. Then came the business partnership that would change everything. Daniel's company had merged with a firm run by Ethan and Melissa Carter, a glamorous couple, known for their charm and success. They were the kind of people who turned heads the moment they entered a room. Ethan had a magnetic personality, confident but warm. Melissa was stunning, graceful, and sharp-tongued in a way that made people listen. At first, Claire welcomed them. She hosted dinners, helped Daniel prepare presentations, and genuinely tried to make them feel like friends. But she began noticing how often their names came up in Daniel's conversations. Ethan thinks we should expand west, or Melissa suggested a new strategy. Claire smiled, but her heart tightened each time. It wasn't jealousy at first, it was fear. Fear that Daniel was moving into a world where she no longer fit. The first time she met Melissa in person, she felt something shift. Melissa walked into their home with confidence, her perfume filling the room before her voice did. She complimented Claire's decor, her dress, her cooking butt. There was something distant in her tone, like she was politely passing time before the real conversation began. And when Daniel and Ethan joined them, Claire noticed the way Melissa laughed at Daniel's jokes, touching his arm lightly. Just enough to seem friendly, but not enough to hide the spark behind it. That night, as they cleared the dishes, Claire mentioned it gently. She seems very comfortable with you. Daniel laughed it off. She's just friendly, Claire. Don't overthink it. I'm not overthinking, she said softly. I just noticed. He sighed, annoyed. You always read too much into things. Can we not do this? It wasn't a fight, but it was the kind of moment that leaves something fragile, cracked. Claire went to bed early that night. Daniel stayed in his office. The weeks that followed were worse. Daniel started spending more time at the office, often working weekends. When he was home, he was distracted, always scrolling through emails or answering calls. Sometimes Claire caught his expression soften when he looked at his phone, and her stomach tightened with unease. She wanted to ask, but fear held her back. She didn't want to be that kind of wife. The one who didn't trust. One Friday evening, Daniel told her there was a company dinner. You should come, he said, almost reluctantly. Everyone will be there. She hesitated, but agreed. Maybe it was a chance to reconnect. She spent hours getting ready. Choosing a deep blue dress Daniel once said made her eyes stand out. When they arrived, the restaurant buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses. Claire felt out of place, surrounded by sleek suits and polished smiles. Daniel disappeared quickly, moving from one conversation to another. She found herself alone at a table, smiling politely as people passed by. Then she saw it. Across the room, Daniel stood beside Melissa. They were talking quietly, close to close. Melissa laughed, tilting her head, and Daniel looked at her the way he used to look at Claire. That small, familiar softness. It hit her like a wave she didn't see coming. She didn't cry. She didn't storm out. She just stood there, watching the man she loved slip further away. It wasn't a dramatic moment. It was quiet, almost ordinary, but inside her, something changed forever. When Daniel finally walked over, he acted as though nothing had happened. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," she said, forcing a smile. "Just a bit tired." On the drive home, the city lights blurred outside the window. Daniel hummed softly to a song on the radio, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. Unaware of the silence sitting beside him, that night Claire lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Daniel fell asleep easily, his breathing steady and calm. She turned to look at him, memorizing his face in the dim light. This was the man who once promised to protect her heart. And now he was the reason it felt so heavy. For the first time, she didn't feel angry or jealous. She just felt gone. Like she had been replaced by someone younger, brighter, more exciting. But deep down, she knew this wasn't about Melissa. It was about Daniel, about how love fades when one person stops watering it. As the clock ticked past midnight, Claire whispered to herself, "I'm losing him." And though her voice was barely audible, it was the first honest thing she had said in months. But what she didn't know then, what she couldn't see in that quiet, broken moment was that this ending was only the beginning of something new. After that night at the company dinner, something inside Claire went quiet. She stopped asking where Daniel was going, stopped waiting for him to text, and stopped trying to bring him back. It wasn't that she didn't care anymore, it was that she had finally accepted he didn't. Silence became their new language. He worked late. She pretended to sleep early. They shared a home, but not a life. The mornings were the hardest. She'd wake to the sound of his coffee mug clinking, the front door closing, and the engine fading down the street. She'd stare at the ceiling, knowing she'd spend another day pretending everything was fine. At work, she smiled through meetings and laughed at small jokes. But the truth was, she felt invisible. Ethan Carter noticed. He was Daniel's business partner. But unlike Daniel, he still looked people in the eye. He had a kindness about him, the kind that made others feel seen. After a meeting one afternoon, he caught Claire in the hallway. "You look tired," he said gently. "Are you doing okay?" It was such a simple question, but it made her eyes sting. "I'm fine." She lied quickly, forcing a smile. He didn't press. "If you ever want to talk about anything, you know where to find me." That small moment stayed with her. Someone had noticed her again. Someone cared enough to ask. In the weeks that followed, Claire saw Ethan often. He was always around for work-related events, and somehow their paths kept crossing. They'd chat briefly about books, music, or Travelland for a few minutes. She'd feel like herself again. Not Daniel's neglected wife. Not the woman everyone pitied silently. Just Claire. But deep down, she knew she was walking a dangerous line. Not because of anything improper, but because attention after months of cold silence felt like sunlight on frozen skin. She didn't crave Ethan. She craved feeling alive. Meanwhile, Daniel grew even more distant. He rarely spoke at dinner. When she tried to tell him about her day, he'd nod absently, his eyes fixed on his phone. One night, she reached across the table, touching his hand gently. "Daniel," she said quietly, "do you still love me?" He looked up, surprised, almost annoyed. "Of course I do." "Why would you even ask that?" "Because I can't feel it anymore," she whispered. He sighed and leaned back. "Claire, you're just stressed. You overthink things. We're fine." But they weren't. She could see it in his tone, in the way he avoided her gaze. His words said fine, but his body had already moved on. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Friday, one of those long corporate charity galas Daniel's firm often hosted. Claire hadn't planned to go. She was tired of pretending, but Ethan called that afternoon and said, "It'd be good to have you there. People always light up around you." His kindness made her agree. She arrived early, wearing a soft emerald dress that made her feel brave again. The event hall glittered with lights and laughter. For a moment, she forgot everything until she heard that familiar laugh across the room. Melissa Carter. Standing beside Daniel, they were close, too close. Melissa's hand rested lightly on Daniel's arm as they spoke. Claire froze. She didn't want to believe it, not without proof, but the look in their eyes said what their words didn't. She could tell by the ease, the way they leaned toward each other, that something had already crossed the line. Her heart raced, but she stayed composed. She wasn't going to make a scene. She turned away, forcing a smile for a coworker, pretending everything was fine. But the air in that room felt suffocating. Every laugh, every clink of glass felt sharp. She needed space as she walked toward the terrace to breathe. She passed behind a curtain near the side hall, and that's when she heard them. Melissa's voice, low but clear. "She'll understand eventually. She always does. You said she's gentle, that she forgives easily." Then Daniel's quiet laugh followed. "She does. She's loyal to a fault." For a moment, Seattle greeted Claire with cold rain and quiet streets, but to her it felt like freedom. She had left behind the pain, the betrayal, and the constant pretending. She rented a small apartment with big windows and no memories. For the first time in years, she was alone but not lonely. The silence no longer hurt. It healed. She joined a small creative marketing firm that focused on storytelling campaigns for local brands. The pay wasn't great, but the people were kind and the work brought her back to life. Her boss, Lydia, saw her talent immediately. "You have something rare, Claire," she said one afternoon. "You don't just design, you feel. That's what makes your work stand out." Claire smiled politely, but deep down, those words touched something that had long been asleep. She had spent years pouring emotion into a marriage that didn't value it. Now, she was pouring it into something that did. The first few months were hard. She doubted herself often, fought tears at night, and sometimes caught herself checking Daniel's social media old habits she was still learning to break. He looked happy in the photos, standing beside Melissa at corporate events, smiling for cameras. But when Claire looked at his face closely, she saw something missing, something she used to bring out in him. Instead of bitterness, she felt something different. Strength. He might have broken her trust, but she refused to let him break her spirit. Work became her therapy. She stayed late, learned new skills, and took every chance to prove herself. Slowly, her designs began getting noticed. One campaign she led went viral, a heartfelt short film about rediscovering yourself after loss. The message was simple, but people connected deeply to it. Emails poured in, and her name started to spread in the industry. Months later, Lydia called her into the office with news. "You've been invited to present at the National Business Innovation Summit," she said, handing her a folder. "It's a big deal, Claire. And guess who's sponsoring it?" Claire took a slow breath as she read the paper. Carter and More Enterprises. Daniel's company. For a moment, her hands trembled. The name hit her like a ghost from another life. Lydia noticed her hesitation. "You okay?" Claire nodded. "I'm fine." But inside, her heart raced. The irony was poetic. The same company where she had felt invisible would now sit in the audience. As she stood on stage, she spent weeks preparing her presentation. Every word, every image, every emotion, she crafted it carefully. Not out of revenge, but purpose. She wanted to tell a story that would speak to anyone who had been broken and rebuilt themselves. She wanted to remind people that failure and pain could be powerful teachers. The day of the summit arrived. Claire dressed simply in an elegant navy suit, hair tied back neatly, confidence in her step. The event hall was grand, filled with executives, entrepreneurs, and media. She walked past familiar faces from her old world, people who once overlooked her, now whispering her name with recognition. And then she saw him. Daniel, standing near the stage entrance with Melissa by his side. He looked the same, handsome, polished, but his expression changed when he saw her. Shock flickered across his face, then something else. Pride, maybe regret. Melissa noticed too. Her smile tightened. Claire didn't stop. She walked straight past them, her heels clicking against the floor, head held high. When it was her turn to speak, the lights dimmed and the audience grew quiet. She stepped up to the podium, her heart steady. "Good morning," she began. "I want to talk about something we all experience: failure. The kind that breaks you quietly. The kind that makes you question your worth. But I also want to talk about what happens when you choose to rise instead of crumble. Her words flowed easily, not rehearsed, but real. She spoke about loss, not of love, but of identity. She spoke about starting over, about learning to value yourself when others don't. Her voice was calm, her message clear. Pain can destroy you, or it can shape you into something stronger. The crowd was silent, listening intently. Even Daniel couldn't look away. Halfway through her talk, she paused and looked out at the audience. Sometimes, she said softly, the people who hurt you become the reason you find yourself again. And when that happens, you realize you never really lost. You just transformed. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. People stood, clapping, cheering. The noise filled the hall like thunder. Claire smiled, not a show smile, but one that came from deep within. From the corner of her eye, she saw Daniel rise slowly, his face pale, eyes glossy. He looked proud but defeated at the same time. Melissa clapped politely beside him, but her smile was strained after the event. Journalists approached Claire for interviews. Business leaders shook her hand. Lydia hugged her. "You were incredible," she whispered. As the crowd thinned, Claire stepped outside for air. The evening breeze carried the scent of rain. She stood under the city lights, breathing deeply. When she heard footsteps behind her, "Claire," a familiar voice said softly. She turned. Daniel stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, eyes filled with something between guilt and longing. "You were amazing," he said quietly. "I had no idea you were capable of that." She smiled faintly. "You never looked long enough to see it." He took a step closer. "Claire, I don't," she interrupted gently. "You don't have to explain. I understand now. We were both lost. You just gave up before I did." He looked down, his voice breaking slightly. "Do you ever think maybe we could start again?" Claire studied him for a long moment. Once, those words would have shattered her. Now, they only reminded her of how far she'd come. "No, Daniel," she said softly. "You watched me break. Now, you'll watch me win." He didn't respond. He just nodded, eyes heavy with regret. Claire turned away. Walking toward the street, the sound of her heels echoing behind her. The city lights shimmered ahead, bright, alive, full of promise. For the first time, she wasn't walking away from something. She was walking toward herself. That night, as she stood by her apartment window, looking over the city she now called home, she smiled. The pain was gone. In its place was peace and pride. Her story wasn't about revenge. It was about rediscovery, about finding beauty after the storm. And though Daniel would forever be part of her past, her future belonged to no one but her. The weeks after the summit felt like a dream. Claire's presentation spread quickly online, shared by industry leaders and featured on business platforms. People called her the voice of quiet strength. She received offers from companies she once thought were far beyond her reach. Her name carried meaning now, not because of Daniel, not because of her past, but because of who she had become. She moved through those days with calm confidence. Her mornings began with coffee and purpose, her nights with peace instead of tears. The woman who once felt invisible had finally stepped into her own light. But even as success grew around her, Claire didn't chase the spotlight. She stayed grounded, remembering the pain that once shaped her. One rainy evening, as she packed up her office, her phone buzzed. The screen flashed with an unfamiliar number, but the voice on the other end made her freeze. "Claire, it's Daniel." She hesitated, unsure how to respond. It had been months since she'd seen him at the summit. "What do you need, Daniel?" she asked, keeping her tone polite. "I'm in Seattle," he said quietly. "I was hoping we could talk just for a few minutes." For a moment, she almost said no. But something in his voice, tired, uncertain, made her agree. "Fine, one coffee, nothing more." They met at a small cafe near the harbor. Daniel looked different, thinner, quieter, a hint of weariness behind his eyes. He smiled awkwardly. "You look Incredible, he said. Claire nodded, sitting across from him. You said you wanted to talk, exhaled. Melissa and I ended things. It wasn't what I thought it would be. She stirred her coffee, not looking up. That's unfortunate. She betrayed me, he said bitterly. Used the company, lied about deals, took credit for things she didn't do. I guess I got what I deserved. Claire finally met his eyes. Maybe it wasn't about getting what you deserved. Maybe it was about learning what you ignored. He looked ashamed. You're right. I hurt you, Claire. I was selfish. You were the one person who believed in me, and I threw it away. She didn't answer right away. The old version of her might have cried or forgiven him instantly. But this Claire had grown. She had learned that not every apology needed to be accepted. I loved you deeply, she said softly. But love can't survive on one person's effort. You watched me disappear piece by piece and said nothing. I can't forget that. Daniel nodded slowly. I understand. I just wanted to tell you I'm sorry and that I'm proud of you. Watching you on that stage, it made me realize how small I made you feel. For the first time, she believed his sincerity. But it didn't change the past. I'm not angry anymore, she said. I just don't want to go back. That chapter's closed. He looked at her, eyes full of regret. Do you ever think about us? About what we had? Claire smiled gently. I used to. But now I think about what I have, the life I've built after you. It's better, Daniel. Not because you're gone, but because I finally learned who I am. He swallowed hard. You're amazing, Claire. I hope you know that. I do, she said simply, standing up. Goodbye, Daniel. He didn't try to stop her. He just watched her walk away the same way he once watched her break. But this time, she wasn't walking out of sadness. She was walking toward her freedom. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the city lights shimmered against the wet pavement. CLA.